Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual PNR planning meeting. As usual, I need to run through various points of procedure before we move to the agenda. Today's meeting is being held under the virtual meetings regulations using Microsoft Teams. All committee decisions will be as valid as decisions made at a physical meeting held in the town hall. For those members of the public watching the meeting on the YouTube link, PNR committee members often use more than one screen during the meeting to look at committee papers, which can mean that a member is not looking at their camera at any given moment. Today's meeting is being streamed live on the internet, and a recorded version will be on the Council's website within 48 hours. As Chairman, I can confirm public written statements will be read out by Council officers. The Planning Committee consists of 13 members adjusted to accord with the political balance, agreed by all the group leaders and the Chief Executive. Please confirm you are leaving the meeting in regard to a declared disclosable pecuniary interest. Compliance is essential to comply with the law. An officer will invite you back into the meeting following determination of the agenda item. Voting procedure. Please use the chat function when proposing or seconding a motion. State clearly what you are moving. This will aid the general public following the planning process online. Voting on applications will be carried out by a roll call. The legal officer will call each councillor's name out in alphabetical order. The vote will be taken on the basis that you have heard the entire debate on the application. Please state if your vote is for the motion or against the motion, or if you wish to abstain. This will ensure the vote is correctly recorded. Please ensure all mobiles are switched off and your IT devices are muted when not speaking. Are there any questions? Ross?
No, there's nothing in chat, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Hazel, please undertake the roll call for today's meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Bird.
Yep.
Councillor Bridger.
Present.
Councillor Bryant. I haven't seen Councillor Bryant appear yet. Councillor Cole.
Present.
Councillor Cherry. I've seen
Councillor.
Councillor.
She's having difficulty getting in.
Sorry. Yes, there she is.
Present.
Councillor Crew.
Here.
Councillor Harley.
Present.
Councillor Hearn.
Present.
Councillor Keating.
Present.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Present.
Councillor McQuillan.
Present.
Councillor Payne.
Present.
Councillor Westwood. I haven't seen Councillor Westwood join yet, so I'll go back to Councillor Bryant and Councillor Westwood. I don't think they've come in yet to the meeting, Chairman. So we have Councillor Berg replacing Councillor Gibbons, Councillor Hearn is replacing Councillor Solomon, and Councillor Keating is replacing Councillor Crockford-Hawley. And for officers, we have Richard Kent, Roger Wilmot, Jessica Smith, Sally Evans, James Wigmore from the Police Directorate, and we have Sue Buck, Ros Heim, Mike Riggle, and Hazel Brinton from Corporate Services. That's the roll call, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 1, public speaking. Addresses by members of the public to be read out by officers, and we have 3 addresses for today's meeting. The first address relates to agenda item 6, 52 dwellings and a substation at the Uplands, Nelsey. Steve Lyon is against the proposal, and his address will be read out by Ros Heim.
Thank you, Chairman. This application should be rejected for the following reasons. COVID-19 has highlighted the need of nearby outside space for the physical and mental well-being of communities. Nailsea has very few public amenities. Central to its appeal is access to open space and connection to open countryside, in contrast to Clevedon, Portishead and Weston, which have an affinity to the coast and enjoy associated benefits. The application should be viewed in this context, and I respectfully suggest you consider the message that building on this long established park would send to the wider community of North Somerset in the light of NSC's draft Green Infrastructure Strategy. Opposition to the application, 189 objections, is centred on preserving the park for the benefit of people who have made Nailsea their home and that of future residents. Please consider the following. The public open space status of the land, planned for since the 1960s, is irrefutable, evidenced as such on the GI interactive map on NSC's website and recently acknowledged in the case officer's report. This statement does not provide the full picture. It also carries the obligation on the council to produce a robust, recent open space assessment before deciding to develop. This was not done before the SAP and has not been done since, and the GI strategy 120221 intends one only by 2027. The application has been rejected by Nailsea Town Council by majority decision twice. Their intimate and informed knowledge of their residents' views and the needs of their town should be respected. Highway guidance states that two-way roads should have a minimum width of 5.5 metres. The road entering and within the site is below national guidelines. A dangerous precedent will be set if standards are not adhered to by the council itself. Mitigation measures are a slippery slope. The development will be offered at commercial terms, and thus the granting of planning permission in 2020 for over 600 homes in the adjoining fields means that rejecting this small development will not deprive anyone of living in the west of Nailsea. Terms used to describe the land were misleading, as were details contained in council minutes dated 9th of November 2018, outlining the due diligence process necessary for tailored support. The application also runs contrary to the laudable aims and objectives of the council's recent draft Green Infrastructure Strategy, just released for public consultation. In conclusion, the land is public open space, has been for almost half a century, and should remain so for the continued health and well-being of the council's Nailsea residents. Thank you.
Thank you. The second address also relates to agenda item 6. Jenny Ford supports the proposal, and her address will be read out by Hazel Brinton.
Thank you, Chairman. This statement in favour of development at the Uplands is made by Jenny Ford, Head of Development at North Somerset Council. The submission is made in the Council's role as landowner. Uplands is part of the Council's Emerging Development Programme. The programme will deliver high quality housing on council owned land and will set new and better standards for that housing. Our proposals for the Uplands seek not only to meet but to exceed planning policy requirements, creating an exemplar development to improve the quality of housing on offer to local people. The site is allocated in the Sites and Allocations Plan, and the proposed homes are included in the 5-year housing supply. By bringing forward allocated sites, we help to prevent speculative applications for lesser quality, unplanned development elsewhere. Despite COVID, there has been extensive consultation and engagement on these proposals, including public drop-in sessions in January 2020. Revised plans were submitted earlier this year to address as many of the consultee comments as possible, and the solutions have been accepted in the officer report. The design team for the application has been led by Michael Riches Architects, who in 2019 won the Sterling Prize for Architecture for a council-led development in Norwich. Michael Riches focus on simple, sustainable designs using local materials and on creating layouts that encourage a strong sense of place and community. The design seeks to emulate nearby older buildings around the Tithe Barn area. Other features of the planning application include 1. A landscape-led approach with a high proportion of green space and improved pedestrian and cycle routes. 2. A housing mix to meet identified local needs, including 8 bungalows and a minimum of 30% affordable housing. 3. All homes will be Passive House certified, one of the highest levels of sustainability possible, requiring excellent construction standards and resulting in very low energy bills. 4. All homes are a minimum of 10% above nationally described space standards, with extra storage space both internally and externally. 5. Despite the high sustainability credentials, the use of cars is fully accommodated with an average of 1.8 parking spaces per home. Each dwelling has at least one space that includes an electrical vehicle charging point. In conclusion, this application is on an allocated site and exceeds planning policy requirements. We encourage the members of P&R to recognise these high standards and to endorse them as an example for others to follow. End of statement, Chairman.
Thank you very much. The last address relates to agenda item 7, Rickford Chapel, Burrington. Lucy Back supports the proposal and her address will be read out by Ros Heim.
Thank you, Chairman. I write to correct some inaccuracies mentioned in the previous meeting on 20th of January. Firstly, it was mentioned that the chapel was only used a few months of the year by the Masons. This is not correct. It was used every month, all year round, not just the summer months, meaning that the vehicles associated with the use were there every month, only occasionally using the orchard for parking. Confirmation of this is publicly available. I was disappointed by the decision at the last meeting, but, as requested, discussed the possibility of providing parking with the applicant. Unfortunately, it would not be economically viable to provide parking spaces on a greenfield site due to the cost involved in doing so, which is disproportionately high in comparison to the work needed to the building for the proposed use. A commercial use is needed for this iconic Grade 2 listed building in order to provide the necessary funds for its upkeep. I would also highlight that the site is within the AONB, so providing parking would be contrary to local and national policies relating to the AONB. The application concerns the change of use of Rickford Chapel only, not the surrounding land. Not the surrounding land within the ownership of the applicant. To request that this be taken into account is inappropriate and contrary to procedure. Further areas within the applicant's ownership are irrelevant and do not form part of this application. The proposed change of use would improve the current parking arrangements allowed by the unrestricted community use the building currently has. Currently, the building could have more than 20 vehicles there every day, whereas the proposed use only requires 4 spaces per day. This proposal should not be penalised for the other existing uses in Rickford and the traffic they generate. It needs to be considered on its own merit. I would highlight that the Highways Officer has no objection to the proposal. The proposed plans are merely to show that no internal or structural alterations are required. How desk or workspace would be laid out would be entirely the decision of any occupier. The number of desks shown are therefore irrelevant. It is the floor space itself that is relevant. Based on the parking allowed under the current use permitted, the support from highways and the recommendation for approval by the planning officer, there would appear to be no justification for refusal of this application. And that's the end of the statement, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 2, apologies. They have been dealt with. Item 3, declaration of disclosable pecuniary interests.
So, Chairman, Councillor Payne is declaring an interest.
Yes. In the appeals on item 9, there's a new there's a new appeal at Claremont Crescent in Weston-super-Mare. So I need to declare that that's directly across the road from where I live, and it could affect the value of my property. So I'm going to declare an interest in that. And in the event that we discuss it, I won't take part.
Thank you. No other comments, Ross?
No other comments.
Thank you very much. Item 4, minutes of January 20th to approve as a correct record. Are there any comments from members via chats?
No comments so far, Chairman.
In which case, are there any members voting against the motion? Ross?
Nothing, Chairman. No.
Are there any members wishing to abstain?
Nothing, Chairman.
In which case, all members support the motion, and that is carried. Thank you very much. Item 5, matters referred by Council, the Executive and other committees. There are none. Item 6, application 20-P/2000/R3, 52 dwellings and one substation at the Uplands, Nailsea. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. I'll start with a presentation just to explain the background to the application. I'll quickly just set it in a little bit of context, and then I'll run briefly through the update sheet to the meeting as well to supplement your agenda papers. So if we could start off by coming to the site location plan, please. Okay, so you can see the context of the site to the south of St Mary's Grove and to the immediate south of the Uplands. It's the red outlined site, which you will see in front of you, accessing from the stub end of the cul-de-sac from the Uplands. I don't know whether, Richard, you're able to use your cursor just to sort of show that. I'm hoping everybody can see that. So it basically comes in off there round a couple of properties, 14A and 14B, the Uplands there. Then runs north up to the back boundaries of bungalows and other properties in the Uplands, where there's hedging along the back boundary, then down to encompass the wooded area there, and then down as far as the bridle way, which some of you may remember being a bridle way that we referred to as being just outside the northern extremity of the Youngwood Lane application that we considered at the last meeting. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, just slightly more detail on this one. You'll perhaps get a slightly easier impression of the fact of where there are some groups of trees. And the access, small access that leads up to the two properties, 14A and 14B, which are just off the end of the turning head of the Uplands. So yeah, that's it there, those two properties. Down the left-hand boundary on your screens, there's a group of protected trees, including some red oaks. And I think it's possibly worth noting on this plan the contour lines, which show that the site is relatively level at the top end, but then slopes downwards across the site, I think by a total of roughly 3 meters down towards the bridleway, and that has formed a particular point of suitability for the scheme and the widespread use of solar PV panels on the south-facing roof slopes of the proposed dwellings. You can just see there's effectively a dog-legged sort of boundary just to the right of the right-hand end of the site. That marks the position where there are some earth banking, and beyond that the wooded area. Again, you can see the bridleway on the bottom boundary, and that is, that's it there. And within that, as you'll see from the layout plan, there is a boundary or margin there to assist effectively with protection for bats. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the layout, this has been designed overall to take some cues from the surrounding sort of historical development within Nailsea. So in terms of the top two lines of development there, they are sort of short terraces which are, I think, picking up on a theme seen in the older parts of Nailsea, whilst the southern rank of development along the southern access road shows some step backs which will incorporate, as you'll see on the later slides, some further planting, effectively trying to widen that out and create some small courtyard type areas, which are perhaps a little more redolent of some of the farm groupings of buildings around the older parts of Nailsea and surrounding Nailsea. In terms of the access, you'll see that comes off the end of the turning head at the uplands, and the main route through the site is that southern one, which I think just see the cursor tracing along that now. There are a couple of routes then that strike northwards between the groups of three and four house terraces. That's the left-hand one, and there's a further one to the right-hand end, and those go round in a loop around there. Those are effectively narrowed in places. Oops, sorry, we just technically got a small problem because I've lost the plans on screen. I don't know whether anybody else has.
Yes.
We can just pause for a moment while we try to restore that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now the layout has been designed with effectively the intention to try and create a modern and green sort of environment. So between the two northern terraces, you'll see a central area there which is of informal open space with footpath through that. That will also provide rear access to the two terraces, which will allow for things like people to bring in their bikes and so on without going through the house. The woodland is retained up at the eastern end of the site, and there are a group of trees at the western end of the site to the west of the southernmost rank of properties, where there are a number of TPO trees which are being retained. On the bottom boundary of the site, you'll see again the margin that I referred to, which is to effectively help create a dark corridor for bats. but you'll see there is also a link through between the 5th, 7th, 9th and 10th dwellings along that rank. So there's path access from the development into that. In terms of the parking provision on here, you will see that it's perhaps not hugely visible or easily visible on here, but there are effectively parallel parking bays alongside the road, which will mean that those parking spaces are available for the dwellings. That will, I think, address and remove the risk of on-street parking causing difficulties for other vehicles to pass. But as you will hear from James Wigmore, it's perfectly possible on this layout for van and vehicle and car to pass each other along these roads. But as I say, that parking issue will be addressed that way. Where there aren't parallel parking spaces adjacent to the road, we will probably be looking at design detailing to sort of prevent parking alongside those areas. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the northern terrace. This shows the on the top rank, that shows the area face.
Roger, sorry, could I just interrupt? We appear to have lost the slides on our YouTube feed. So if we could just pause there whilst we try and reconnect that, and members could just bear with us. Whilst members can see it, it looks like it's not showing to members of the public. So please could you just hold fort a minute and stay on mute, and we'll just re-establish the connection. So I think we're now back with the slide that shows the layout of the scheme, Roger. So I think if we could pick up from that point.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you, Richard. Hopefully everybody can see that now. So the scheme consists of a mix of 2.5 story and single story properties. The two northernmost terraces are essentially on two floors. You'll see from the bottom row an indication of the solar PV panels, which are taking advantage of the southern aspect of this site. If we can go on to the next slide, please.
Can we just pause again there, Roger? It looks like one or two councillors might have left the meeting inadvertently. Hazel, are you able to confirm who's still in the meeting for us, please?
On my list, Richard, I can see Councillor Cole, Councillor Harley. I'm not sure about Councillor Cherry. I think she may be in. Councillor Tonkin, who is here as a guest. Councillor Leigh Morgan. Councillor Bird. Councillor Keating, Councillor Bryant. Oh, thank you, Councillor Cherry. Councillor Crewe and Councillor Westwood, I believe. Councillor Payne. So I believe Councillor Hearn, Councillor Bridger, Councillor McQuillan. I believe all councillors are actually in.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to check that. Okay, thank you, Roger. Sorry, please carry on.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So the slide that you see in front of you now is the southernmost rank of dwellings, and you'll see to the right-hand end of the top there's effectively a cut line. So these two rows effectively are a single row. It's there the northern elevation of the southernmost rank of dwellings. So these are the ones that face onto the main access road coming into the site. And as you'll see from this, there's a mix of roof heights to add interest and to create some variety in the street scene. There are groups of bungalows as well. And just to try and help with orientation, on the bottom, to the right-hand end of the bottom row are the group of red oaks that I mentioned, quite close to the western boundary as you come into the site. And at the top, you'll see to the left-hand end the beginning of the woodland area. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. And just an indication again, in connection with the energy conservation and generation characteristics of the site. This is the southern elevation of that same terrace, again showing the use of solar PV panels on the south-facing roof slopes. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. Again, slightly sort of faint in terms of coloration, but I think you should get at least some impression from this of the areas where there are road narrowings. There are some small areas of courtyard parking, and the areas where there are parallel parking bays alongside the access road, with those being, as I understand it, treated with an equivalent or something akin to grasscrete, so that overall the development's likely to have a fairly soft sort of appearance as you sort of progress through the scheme. If we can go to the next slide. Sorry, it's the one preceding that. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, just gives, this is the soft landscaping, and gives perhaps a little bit more impression of the informal open space that forms the centrepiece of the two northerly terraces. You can see an indication of the open space, giving space around the red oaks at the western end of the site. And again, the buffer margin on the bottom boundary here, which is in recognition of the bat flight path along there. So, having, I think, hopefully explained the background to that, just a couple of sort of brief points I'll sort of mention, and I'll run very quickly through the update sheet. So, just as a reminder, this is an allocated site. It forms part of our site allocations plan, and we're obviously in a position where with less than our 5 years of housing supply, we do need to deliver on our allocated sites. The council itself is in the process of creating a development programme to deliver homes. A key objective of that is to set high development standards that hopefully other developers will follow. You may recall a response I gave at the last meeting in connection with Youngwood Lane, where we were asked about standards on sites like Locking Parklands, and I did allude there to the fact that our ownership of one of the sites potentially gave us much more ability to deliver on those development standards, which I think a lot of people recognise. This particular layout has been designed again to offer sort of good design quality. It's of a nature in terms of the environmental standards that are not currently being met by commercial volume house builders, and it's something which is consistent with our climate emergency declaration as a council. Just a little bit of background. It's not really part of the planning issue at all, but it's been the subject of the funding award for accelerated construction based on modern methods of construction. The fact that the site must be developed for 30% affordable housing and then built at a specified accelerated rate. It's intended to address a number of locally identified needs, including a mix that provides bungalows and opportunities for Nailsea residents to downsize. You're possibly aware it's been through the design review panel twice. It has been the subject of a number of consultations, and in terms of the design quality, it meets and exceeds the standards in terms of accessible units and nationally described space standards for internal space provision. In terms of its overall design, it's deliberately been very much part of the design to try and reduce the dominance of the car in the environment, reflect greater interest in and value attributed, I think, to active travel, which so many people have experienced during lockdown, and again reflects probably the desire to perhaps move towards healthy lifestyles, reflect the climate emergency, and create perhaps a bit more of an intimate environment than many volume house builders have tended to create on their layouts. It's picked up, as you'll see from the design and access statement, on the sense of local identity. I referred to the development form, and in terms of quality of the materials, they've been selected for their suitability to the local Nailsea characteristics. So just moving on briefly then to the update sheet. We've had a little bit of additional information in connection with the tracking details, and as you'll see from that update sheet, we've confirmed that satisfactory access for fire appliances can be achieved. There's one or two small details probably that need to follow on from that, but those are matters that I think can be easily addressed. On the update sheet, I think there are 6 additional letters of objection received, and we've reported the reasons for those. There is one further one that's been received since even the update papers were prepared. And again, we've responded to those additional third-party comments, which were particularly about vehicle matters and the width of roads and the ability of those roads to accommodate a variety of service vehicles. So we've addressed those on the update sheet. And finally, there's just a reference at the end towards the recommendation and the use of conditions. And we've basically been advised by the council solicitor that in a case where we have a land interest, we're not able to directly enter into a Section 106 agreement with ourselves. So it's likely that we would be looking to a condition that will effectively require a Section 106 agreement or equivalent provision to what would have been secured through the Section 106 agreement at or before effectively the decision would finally be issued. And that's something we're taking advice from, the precise means of doing that from our solicitor. Thank you. Sorry to have taken up time on that, but hopefully that explains the background to the application.
Thank you. Councillor Tonkin. You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you. Most favourite expression around, isn't it? Chairman, thank you. This is no ordinary planning application. It's a local authority application. This authority, for land that it owns on the outskirts of Nailsea. It is land that has been enjoyed by a huge amount of residents, not just from this locale, for leisure facilities over a long number of years. It has been used for anything from dog walking to practice football pitches. In 1976, the then owner of the land applied for planning permission to build, but was refused on the grounds of overdevelopment, and the land was bought by the then Woodspring Council as public open space. Nothing has changed. In 2015, The land was included, much against my better wishes as ward member, in the Sites and Policies document to help alleviate the authority's dire 5-year supply deficit. Now we have an application for 52 houses, which nobody in the locality wants, hence 180 plus negative representations. To make matters worse, the land immediately to the south of this site was granted planning permission at appeal for 460 dwellings. So there is another reason that this site should remain a local oasis amongst all the other development. There is another council-owned site within the Youngwood Lane area of the same size as the uplands, which would be far more suitable for development of this nature. I will leave the more formal planning proposal to Councillor Bird, but urge the committee to reconsider the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bird.
Sorry, I could get to the microphone. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would like to say I very much admire the ethos of this development, and I appreciate all the effort the officers have put into it, into the environmentally friendly design of this site. However, this development is simply in the wrong place. Let me explain. The ethos of this site is to create an eco-friendly housing development which promotes walking, cycling, and the use of public transport. Yet, the site is 1.2 miles from the town centre, 1.2 miles from the railway station, and a good walk from a single service bus stop. The reality is the town centre is too far to walk and carry shopping home. Plus, as only 2 to 3% of people in Nailsea use the train, even if you manage to double this because of the ethos of the development, it will have little impact on the residents' lives and the reliance on the car. Even if the initial take-up of buyers have the right ethos, i.e. 1 car per household, the reality long-term is going to be very different. Necessity means car ownership will be more than the parking spaces available on the site. 46% of households in the area have 2 cars or more. As there is no extra space on the development, where will all these extra cars park? In 1976, Wood Spring Council refused planning permission on the site because it was had restricted width access, i.e. the small cul-de-sac, and then said it would be dangerous to the residents. This in a time when car ownership was small, as were the cars, and you could park a car in the 1970s garage and get out of it. Not nowadays. The cul-de-sac has not changed since 1976. It is exactly the same restricted access to the same site whose width is well below national guidance. Cars are now much bigger than they were then. Michael Rich tried to justify the access by comparing it with roads in Nailsea, originally designed for horse and cart, which I hardly think is relevant. Given any extra cars will be enabled to park on the development, the cul-de-sac will be the obvious first choice for parking, quickly followed by the short, narrow stretch of the uplands towards St Mary's Grove, where driveways here are only on one side of the road. This stretch of road will be the main access route into the site. Both these sections of road are narrow. Overflow parking will further increase the restricted nature of the uplands and the site access. Were this development built, I can only imagine the problems the recycling lorries are going to regularly have trying to gain access to the site and the rest of the uplands. Given all the reasons above, I would suggest that this site is not acceptable for this development. It is contrary to the policy CS11 of the core strategy and policies DM24 and DM28 of the Sites and Policies Plan. I would therefore propose refusal of this application due to the restricted access compromising safety and the traffic problems the lack of parking on the site will cause in the surrounding area. In summary, I do not feel this development will attain the high standard it sets out to achieve were it built on this site, and I look for a seconder.
Councillor Hearn.
I'll second, but I'd also like to make some comments. This plan of this development first came to my attention, I was working at a group called Nailsea Disability Initiative. So went along to the meeting held at the Tide Barn with two reasons in mind. On behalf of NDI and the people we helped and their requirement in a home, and as a councillor of the adjoining ward. I understood that this site was to be mainly social housing and being designed with the disabled person in mind as a priority due to the short supply of this type of homes. One of the things I mentioned when I was at that meeting was that all new properties, I felt, had to have doorways wide enough to take wheelchairs, and no one knows of the requirements inside. As Mike's already mentioned, Nailsea Town Centre and the doctors in particular is, if you're walking, is according to Google 1.1 mile away, and if you take a car, it's 1.3 miles and takes you pass through schools. The bus stop is about a quarter of a mile away from this site, but disabled people cannot guarantee a place on the bus because they're only allowed to take one wheelchair or one pushchair, so they're reliant on a car. The site does not appear to be designated disabled parking, though in some of the paperwork it says there will be. The properties that have got designated parking are those properties that are going to be sold. Now, somebody for disabled requires a greater size access to a vehicle. There's no drop curbs that I can see in this development because there's no driveways. In the accessible housing statement, it mentions that there's 8 wheelchair adaptable bungalows, total of 4 one-bed and 4 two-bed. It also states that there's going to be 8 wheelchair accessible parking spaces, but there's nothing there that I can see. I'm finding it difficult to sort of bring those into line. If we're going to need the disabled properties, then disabled people need to be able to get in and out of their vehicles, because they do, in many cases, get that under their payment schemes. We've mentioned the road, and I'm reading some of the documents. The road width does not comply with the Highways Development Design Guide, and it's acknowledged in the D&E Highways and Transport document. So North Somerset should not be using double standards. If we shouldn't be doing to our own properties, allowing narrower ways if we're not going to allow them for developers. The issue of the road width has been brought up on a number of occasions at council briefing sessions and at Nailsea Town Council planning meetings by both councillors and the public. Following on from the COVID pandemic, users of the pavements do require them on both sides of the road. We've all moved from one side of the road to the other to avoid other people. And in some cases, you step out into the road to avoid this person without even thinking about the traffic behind you. And electric cars, you don't hear as well. So if we're trying to encourage the electric car, so we need the space to be able to get them. The site is adjacent to a bridleway, so there will be people walking through the development to access the footpaths and the main roads. On the other side of the bridleway, as already mentioned, there's going to be a development of 450 houses to be built. So they'll be using this development as a walkway through for various reasons, going to school for one. The road vehicles are getting larger, and I'm not just including domestic cars, delivery lorries, etc. We use these more since the pandemic started. Part of the layout on the corners has the vehicles coming over the pavement in the middle sections. I've seen it on the plans, on the drawings being provided, irrespective of what the update sheet has said. This is completely unacceptable. It just needs a child to run on from a parent walking along the pavement for a serious accident to happen. I feel refusal is the only way forward because of the road width. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Richard Kent would like to speak, and then Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Before I bring Richard in, there's a couple of points I want to raise. The first one being more of a question. Last month, the committee approved the Youngwood Lane application for 168 dwellings on the proviso that the proposal was fully compliant with the council's highway and parking policies. CS11, DM24, DM28 to name but 3. With another pending application close to the site, just off the Perrings, officers are requesting revised plans from the applicant demonstrating the carriageway should be at least 5.5 metres wide, with 2 additional footways of 2 metres in width. So I'm curious to know why the council's parking and highway policies are being undermined with this application. So I'll let Richard come in, and I've got another point to raise.
So, Chairman, excuse me, I'll ask James Wigmore from the Highway team just to comment on that in a moment. As you're aware, we have to deal with every case as it comes in front of us, and this has been looked at extremely thoroughly, this application, to ensure that it would work from a 21st century planning point of view. And as Roger Wilmot said in his introduction, this is designed to be a state-of-the-art sustainable development. We have declared a climate emergency after all, and we're trying to bring forward development as an exemplar as a council. Happens to be that we are also the planning authority, but we have to deal with it on the basis of the application that's in front of us. But it has been looked at scrupulously to make sure that it would work in a technical and operational sense, and James can give you a bit more information on that in a moment. We've also looked very closely at connectivity to facilities, the train station to the nearest shop and so on, and we are satisfied it does meet the criteria that were expected for schemes of this nature. But there was reference to a previous planning permission. Again, that things change over time, and we can't place reliance on a permission that was refused some time ago. We have to look at the application as it stands today and apply modern standards and assessments to it, and that's what we're doing. We're trying desperately not to get into car-borne development or a car-dominated development. We want it to be, as a council and as a planning authority, to be designed in a way that is pedestrian-friendly, that it works with cyclists and connectivity. It's got a good landscape scheme. It's 100% compliant when it comes to affordable housing policy, so it meets the affordable housing policy. It's got the it does have the provision for the 8 disabled bungalows, so it does set the direction in all sorts of ways. There was reference made to recycling and whether the appropriate vehicles could get into the site. That's all been checked, and so all these things have been looked at. But perhaps I'll ask James just to come in on some of those transport points, and then possibly Roger just to look at the other details.
Thank you, Richard. If I can start with road widths, and if we can look at the existing access road to start with. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Richard, are you able to share the site layout, please?
Yeah.
So it's been mentioned about the Highways Design Development Guide, which is the guide we use for new roads and highways. And it's correct to say that 5.5 is the standard that we look at for new roads. What we need to remember is that the cul-de-sac at the uplands that this site is to come off is an existing roadway. So we couldn't retrospectively apply those standards, but what we do need to be satisfied is that the road system will work. We have to be satisfied that it will be safe. So what we have in the existing cul-de-sac is about 4.85 to 4.95 width roadways. There's also a pull-in, and there are 1.8 to 2 metre wide footways on either side of the cul-de-sac. So the applicant has demonstrated tracking for emergency vehicles, for delivery vehicles and for refuse vehicles. And this includes tracking to show that a 7.5 tonne box van can pass through the cul-de-sac at the same time as a large car in the other direction. In addition, they have highlighted that there is the turning area which allows for a car to wait. What we have required is that the applicant provides a contribution for a traffic regulation order if it became necessary that the cul-de-sac was being blocked with parked cars. Then funds would be available for a traffic regulation order to put in parking restrictions if those were necessary. So that's the existing access, and there's also other sites across North Somerset where similar width accesses have been used for new developments. So what we're not doing is setting what one of the members said was a dangerous precedent for unsafe accesses. Well, that's not the case, because this isn't unusual. There are other places where similar width accesses have been used. If we go to the internal layout, I think what we have to do is sort of forget what we know about new developments that many of us have seen and look at this in a different way. This is pedestrians and cyclists first. The government is promoting active travel as the first choice travel option, not public transport, not travelling by car, but active travel. So this development is designed that as people come into it, they will recognise that it's designed not around the motor car, but around people walking and cycling. And you'll see that the footways in most locations, they don't go alongside the carriageway, so there's not an issue of people stepping immediately off the footway into the carriageway. You'll also see, I think it's the later plan, Richard, that shows the different coloured surfacing materials. It shows more clearly the way the road goes wider and narrower, and the result of that is that it will keep speeds low. If you have wide roads, then the traffic will generally go at higher speeds. But this isn't a through road. This is a housing estate where people are going to live. It's not designed for cars to speed through. And you'll see the sort of raised junctions, which are designed to be at the same level as the footway, so that pedestrians, people in wheelchairs, mobility scooters, there's no need for a drop curb because it's at the same height as the footway. So it has all been, the internal layout has all been tracked for vehicles. And what we're not saying is people are going to be able to drive speedily around this site and not have to slow down, perhaps if there's a delivery vehicle coming the other way. They will have to do that. But that's the whole design isn't designed for people to go around quickly. It's designed for there to be pedestrians and children playing. It's not a through route. So I think that's probably all I wanted to say on the road widths for the time being. I'm not sure whether we're going to come back to parking or whether you want me to address that now, Chair.
Okay, just a quick response to what you said. You didn't really explain why we're applying double standards to two adjacent sites, Youngwood Lane and the Perrings.
Okay, yeah.
Last month, we were insistent, the members and officers agreed that with the Youngwood Lane application, highways and parking standards should be fully compliant. Yet with this application, we're taking a different approach. And I think being a council application, we should be seen to be whiter than white and not applying double standards. Anyway, we'll move on to my second point, if I may. The report implies most of the services are within easy walking distance, which is very misleading indeed. For the most part, homeowners will be heavily reliant on their cars to access a whole range of services in the town centre, which is well over a mile away. On that basis, the 15% reduction in car spaces makes no sense and is only included in the report to circumvent the council highway policies and is not justified. So how do you respond to that?
Sorry, Chair, is this
well, to any officer who wants to respond.
Could I come back on the point about Youngwood Lane? So what I forgot to do is I forgot to set the scene that this isn't a development with traditional development with roadways, footway on each side, houses with a driveway with a garage. This is a new kind of development.
Yeah, can I just butt in there? Sorry, but if I can just repeat the point Councillor Byrne made, which is fantastic. This site, if it was closer to the town centre, would be a-okay, but because it's where it is, it's just not feasible. People will be heavily reliant on cars.
Okay, can I explain what we've done to the current parking standards planning document policy does allow for us to deviate from the parking standards where there is justification in an application to do so. Now, what we've done with this site, we have run it through a tool to see how accessible it is. Now, this is a tool that is used. It's based on a tool used by Wiltshire County Council since 2011. Bath and North East Somerset have used it since 2015. So we have gone through the location of schools, of services, of bus stops, and how many services serve them. We've gone through the location of the station, the proximity, and the number of services from the station, how far away the supermarket is. So we have carefully gone through all this, and we have also required that none of the parking on this site is in the form of garages, because there's a lot of evidence, there's national guidance that states that less than 40% of garages are used for parking cars. There's RAC guidance, there's RAC surveys from 2014 that support that, less than 50%. And North Somerset's own surveys that they've carried out at Locking Castle and Portishead, I've forgotten the name, Portishead Marina, where part of the parking problems have been down to the fact that people do not use garages. If this were a traditional design, 35 of the parking of the, I think it's 96 parking spaces that are here would have been in the form of garages, of which we can expect that only half of those would have been used for the purpose, and then cars would have been pushed out onto the highway, the surrounding highways. So this is a very different design than we're used to in North Somerset. So it's not surprising that people are expecting that it doesn't work.
Yes, you've just made a very good point. You just referenced the marina in Portishead. That location is smack bang in the middle where the shops are. You're missing the point. This is a mile and a quarter away from all facilities, apart from the corner shop.
With respect, Chair, can you chair the meeting? You're having lots of goes at bites at the cherry at this. With respect.
Councillor Melbourne, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, I think that this application, or aspects of this application, is the most impressive that I've ever seen. I mean, these houses are going to be energy efficient, high level of insulation, triple glazing, solar panels on every property, no gas boilers, all electric, with electric charging facilities on every house. Plus. Absolutely brilliant. And this should be the yardstick by which all future applications should be measured. This is a development for the future and extremely important for our zero carbon ambitions. But I believe that it's in the wrong place. As has already been said, it's 1.25 miles from the shops. And if anything like my wife, she does one shop a week and comes back laden with food. There's no way that she could carry that all the way home. It's 1.25 miles from the library, from the doctor's surgery, and so on. So the majority of people living on this development will need to use their cars, which has the potential, of course, to cancel out all the design benefits that I was applauding a minute ago. Councillor Bird's excellent analysis of the potential parking problems is likely to be encountered, especially for recycling lorries and other large vehicles trying to get in, and particularly when highway safety could be compromised. So I'm very, very uncomfortable with this application. I just wish it was somewhere else. Thank you.
Ros.
So it's Councillor Bridger next, Chairman.
Councillor Bridger.
Thank you, Chair. It's really difficult, this one. I'm finding it really difficult. I know that all 4 ward members are in this meeting, including the chair, which is fair enough, but I wish I had that luxury in Yatton, I must say. It's obviously a very delicate balance between benefits and harms, as it always is. I think it is important to note this isn't, as the officer said, this isn't the kind of site that would be brought forward by any of the volume house builders, at least not currently, and I think that should be noted. It's a highly sustainable, low carbon housing development. I'm familiar with the award-winning developments from the architects in Norwich. It's difficult because I think the direction of travel actually that we need to be going in is actually for fewer parking spaces on developments. But I understand the concerns of those members who've spoken against the proposal, because but what we're being asked to do really is to look at the site with our through looking at the future, but through the lens of where we are currently, and I think that's difficult because our policies tend to lag behind in terms of where our ambition is when it comes to planning policy as well. So anyway, I visited the site myself on Sunday. It's very cold. It's quite exposed there on the sort of the ridge. I did observe, even the weather wasn't great, I did observe a number of people walking their dogs, and the sense of openness. So I do absolutely respect that. And the points made by members, and actually some representations that we've received as members by email. I think, as I walked around the site, I saw the bridleway to the south, and actually the way that linked in with what looked like, local members might be able to confirm, but it looked like that linked to a number of sort of public rights of way in the vicinity. And as I moved away from the site, I saw that it was actually quite close to the Grove Sports Centre. I think that if I had a concern about the site, I think the main issue for me is access. It is a very constrained access from the cul-de-sac there, from the uplands. I take the officer's point about the fact that the entrance will be narrowed to slow traffic and increase safety, and I think James Wigmore is right in that it'll be very evident to anyone entering this site that this is a site where people and cyclists come first and cars second, and I think it's important to note that, and for us not to, again, to slightly adjust our lens when looking at this particular site. I noted that the lane from the uplands, I saw a few people actually walking through that lane with their dogs, walking then directly across the site towards the bridleway. I noticed that there's a feature of the design which will retain that, and actually probably make that retain that as a footway or a cycleway through the development. And as I say, there appears to be a network of pedestrian routes and a bridleway and public rights of way around this site, heading in all sorts of directions. So I'm genuinely listening to what members are saying on this one, because I think, as I say, it's a very delicate one. I'd like to hear what other members have got to say about it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ros.
Councillor Cherry has asked to speak next.
Councillor Cherry.
Thank you. I would like to say that I've looked at the design and I am very impressed by the sensitive changes that have been made and the preservation of the woods. And of course, we're all very, very keen on the passive house idea. The real problem, though, is I did also go and visit the site like Steve did. And of course, I saw all the people using that open space. And I heard people saying, this is our favourite, this is where we go. So I am very aware of the impact of losing that amount of green space. But I do think that the real problem is the site location and the access. And I'm also very, very concerned about health and safety issues in terms of we're encouraging people to do much more active travel. But if you have narrower roads, you're going to actually have cars moving along narrow roads with one pavement and more children, a lot of children moving there. And I am really concerned about the risk to children, which I know that you can do all sorts of things with traffic control, but I just think that it needs a lot more thought. I'm also really concerned about the access for the disabled, which Sandra has brought up, because there's no doubt this site is significantly far away from the main centre. And it's not like Portishead. And you mentioned that there are other sites where you've used this sort of scheme, but I think it's very impractical. But it's got good motivation behind it. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Ros.
Councillor McQuillan, Chairman, has asked to speak next.
Councillor McQuillan.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Bridger alluded, this is a challenging one. I completely understand the strength of feeling around the open space, and I think as Councillor Cherry has just outlined, it does make it difficult. So on the one side, on the other side, we have a site that's allocated to housing. I appreciate that it might not have been something that was popular at the time or is popular now, but it is now allocated. And this is an opportunity to meet housing demand in a very sustainable and innovative way. So on balance, I'm minded to approve. I still have some concerns, and like Councillor Bridger, I will listen to the debate. One point I will make briefly, though, is I think we have to be very careful in our assumptions of what things will be like post-COVID. I think we have to, it's equally likely that things will change in a permanent way in terms of the way people work and the way people shop. So some of the trends at the moment around car size and shopping may not be appropriate. So it is difficult, as others have said, to sort of imagine the future. But at the same time, this is also our opportunity to shape the future to an extent. So I have concerns, but I'm minded to approve. I'm happy to move on to the next councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Ros.
Yes, Councillor Crew has asked to speak next, Chairman.
Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you just remind me that we have actually had a recommendation, have we?
Yes.
Right. Well,
to refuse.
I'll speak against refusal. All these things are all very interesting, but we have to look at the practicalities these days. Officers have to come up with plans on all the land we own to fight off this fact we don't have over the 5-year supply. So that alone is actually lets it clear that officers need to do this. But if you look in practicalities, whatever we do in terms of applications for sites, we cannot retrain people. So all the talk about how people park, how people get to the shops, people will do what they do ordinarily. They'll move in, they'll end up with 2 cars, 3 cars, will still drive, regardless of what we try and do. Also, Chairman, if you look around, we have other sites where we have this type of thing, we plan it well, everything with good intention, and you then find 3 or 4 cars. Yes, we know we need open space. Yes, open space is very critical. But nonetheless, we know from information we had yesterday, if you look all around the district, we have a lot of land that we can't build on. It's time we thought of, and there are areas in Nailsea, because I've looked at them many times, we need to look at creating open space for people to go to, but we do have to recognise that we do need to build houses. This is a good development, and I think it should be supported. And if it goes on beyond 4 o'clock, I won't be voting at all, because I have a WECA meeting. But if it's by 4 o'clock, I'll be voting for approval.
Thank you. Ros.
Councillor Westwood would like to speak next, Chairman.
Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Good to be here. Took a lot of time to get in. Like a number of other councillors, I went along and had a look at the site. An absolutely admirable site, as it were. The one thing I thought when I looked at it was, I do hope they're not using the cul-de-sac road as the access. There you go. That is very disturbing that that is going to be the access, despite what's been said. The points that you made several times, Chairman, were good points in my view, as far as our relationship with our people are concerned. We've got to be consistent. Also, people have talked about the fact that this site is, and it is brilliant. It's the people who did the Goldsmith street development, which won multiple awards, which is in the middle of Norwich, basically close to all facilities. If this was that, there's a piece of land in my ward, or the so-called Mill Cross site, which is now in the hands of Alliance, and I would be absolutely over the moon if they used these people, which I hope they do, to design it for the Mill Cross site, because that would be totally appropriate, because it's close to facilities. People talk about what's going to happen post-COVID with a change in shopping habits. The biggest change in shopping habits seems to be that you get your stuff delivered in quite large box vans. That's where we're at the moment, and possibly for the foreseeable future. I take back what Councillor Crew said, that people will behave as people behave, as far as parking and buying or having 2 or 3 cars. I don't think that necessarily applies as far as this one's concerned, because the type of houses are the type of houses, and the obvious reason for buying one of these is because you want to be an innovator. You want to have a house that is going to help towards the climate emergency. You know, some people will put their money where their mouth is, as it were, in terms of the houses that they buy, and we should be encouraging that. On balance, I don't know which way I'm going to vote, and right until the end on this one, because it is very difficult. As has been said, if this was somewhere else, Councillor Tonkin made reference to another site that is available, which would be much better. I do hope that that's the case, and that we could move very quickly forward on an alternative site if this one is turned down, because we do need to be leading on this. We do need to be leading as an authority. I mean, the design of the houses, the spacing of the houses is right where it should be. Anyway, thank you very much.
I wonder if I could clarify with Councillor Tonkin, the other site which he mentioned, how far away it is.
Chairman, it's about a quarter of a mile away. It's on the eastern side of north of Youngwood Lane.
Thank you. Ros.
Yes, Councillor Bryant has asked to speak, Chairman.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, excuse me. First, before I make my pitch, so to speak, I have a question for Richard Kent. We've heard a great deal, and it's just come up again in the last few minutes, about an alternative or comparable site. Can we know why our officers haven't or have looked at that and taken the one that's before us in preference?
Chairman, yes, through you. If we could mute, I'm getting an echo.
Oh, that's me, sorry.
So I guess that the starting point with this application, as with every other planning application we deal with, is the development plan. So this site is allocated for residential development in our sites and allocations plan. So that was tested and examined not very long ago at all, and was found sound, and the allocation has been carried forward on that basis. So you have to start with that as your opening assessment when you consider the application. So the site is allocated for development by the council in the council's local plan. So moving from there, you have to then look at what are the site specifics that might then come into play. So it's the relationship with neighbouring properties and so on and so forth. But the principle of the development of a development for residential use has been accepted through the local plan process. On that basis, referring back to the use of the use of the land as green space, that is covered in the report as to why that is no longer something that we can run with. It has been looked at with Sport England. It was looked at through the local plan process, and the allocation was made accordingly. So whilst there may be other land all around the LC, that needs to be looked at through the forthcoming local plan process to bring forward additional sites. And as members know from the discussions we've been having, we are going to have to find more sites. We do have a 5-year supply shortfall, so there is a presumption in favour of allowing residential development. So again, the council is trying to do, as was mentioned, the council is trying to do its bit by bringing forward its land and bringing forward a planning application as quick as it can in an exemplar design to meet the climate change emergency. So if we were to be seen to be stalling or delaying or even refusing our own attempt to bring things forward, I think that will send a very difficult message for us when it comes to future development sites. So if members were in that area where they felt a refusal was something they wanted to follow through, then I think you really ought to think carefully about that. It may be better to defer it for further discussion. As was said, there are, and I'll ask James Wigmore to comment in a second, just on the transport package in the round. So, as one of the councillors said, Councillor Westwood said, that we would expect people to be buying into the site to be innovators, to not be people that would live in a traditional way when it comes to travelling and transport, to be more reliant on bikes and car clubs and so on. Retail shopping, as was said again, there is more online opportunities, so not everybody has to walk the shops, and if they can, there's a supermarket with about a kilometre. So a lot of this stuff has been looked at in some detail, and perhaps James could just come back on this particular point about access to facilities, if you could, James, please.
Thanks, Richard. Yes, as Richard said, the supermarket is less than a kilometre away. The primary school and the secondary school are all within reasonable distances of the site that we'd consider suitable for walking. And then the bus stop is less than 300 metres away. And what Richard was saying about how people are going to live in the future, yes, it's difficult to know, but we do see more deliveries happening. So people who keep a car for rare, for rare things like a weekly shop or an occasional visit here and there, well, it does not make financial sense to run a car for very occasional use when there's a car club. Taxis, private hire vehicles are much cheaper. But also, if I can just go back to the parking provision here, because it's lower car. We're looking at lower car ownership, not low car ownership. This would have, I just worked it out, 1.8 parking spaces per dwelling. So the 1-bedroom bungalows will have 1 parking space. The 4-bedroom houses would have 2 parking spaces, and all the rest of the 2 and 3 beds would also have 2 parking spaces. Somebody mentioned Goldsmith Street in Norwich. The parking, it's 0.8 car spaces per dwelling. So we're not trying to compare it to that. That is a town centre location, but this is 1.8 parking spaces per dwelling. But what's happening here is people are going to have the option of living a different lifestyle. There's obviously mentioned all of the sustainable measures on the homes themselves. There's the bridleway access adjacent to the site. The site is within reach of a station and schools and services and bus stops, and there is a car club provided. So if we don't consider that we can get more sustainable locations than this, I think we are going to struggle, because this is a reasonably accessible location.
The 1.8 spaces per dwelling, that is based on the 15% reduction.
So 1.8 is what they're providing. So if they were to provide the full amount of parking that we would normally require, they would require 110 spaces. What they're proposing is 95, of which one of them is a car club. As I said earlier, if this was a traditional development, probably 36 of those spaces would be garages, of which most of them, probably half of them, would end up filled with clutter or used as extra living space. So in reality, if you extrapolate that out, if this was a traditional development, 92 spaces would be available for parking cars. The proposal is providing 95. So I don't see the issue with overspill parking.
Ros.
Councillor Hearn has asked to speak, Chairman.
Councillor Hearn.
Moment, Chairman. I did ask a question and said I wish to speak after it.
Okay. Can I bring in Councillor Hearn first, and I'll come back to you, Richard?
This is Councillor Pete Bryant. I was asking a question. I asked Richard a question, and I wanted to follow up.
Okay, carry on.
Can I continue?
Yes, please do.
Thanks very much. Chairman, globally, I think the UK is more attuned to the problems of global warming than probably most other countries in the world. What our officers have put before us is an absolutely superb development, which takes into account everything you could possibly think of to try and reduce, in our way, that global warming. Now, I've heard for a long time this afternoon about the width of the road. and various things. I think, quite honestly, that because of this particular application, and what may well happen for the future, is that that problem is infinitesimally small in comparison to what our officers are trying to do for the good of the country and especially for this authority. And we can set a marker down for other authorities to follow us. Now, I'm aware that the councillors who are living in that ward or get in that area, in that ward, are getting absolute earache from members of the public. And we've all suffered that. But sometimes we've got to grasp the bullet. And just remember that anything to do with planning, we all on the up front want to see change until it affects us personally. And then by God, everything falls down. And I know I'm one of them as well. I don't like things happening around me because we don't like change. But I think, Chairman, we should go with the officer's recommendation, and I will for one will be voting in favour of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hearn.
Right, I have a question, please, for James Wigmore. You mentioned this sort of method of producing to make whether the amenities around about were right. What have you mentioned supermarkets. Now, how close does the supermarket have to be? And I mean a supermarket, not a convenience store, which is the closest type of store to the site. You mentioned buses and what have you. How often do those buses need to travel to make this all relevant? Because this site has one bus that goes through Backwall, maybe one an hour. The other one, maybe 2 an hour. That is not very many, considering you're going to have the other estate for 450 properties or homes. So I want to know how this formula is worked out, please.
Okay, yes, I'm happy to answer that.
James.
Yes, happy. Yeah, so for the bus stops and services, so it's walking distance in meters to the nearest bus stop with a daily service, and then we give different scores based on the distance. So this site has got a bus stop within 300 meters. And then the next question is about how frequent is the bus service on any stop within 500 meters of the site. And this site there's a 60-minute or less service. I can't comment on services that are going to be provided to do with Youngwood Lane development, but there's a 60-minute or less service in 500 meters of this site. And then the number of bus services within 500 meters of the site that are 60-minute frequency. There's only one service. So that is what we based that criteria on. Then there are obviously lots of other, you mentioned.
Can I ask, is that single decker or double decker? Because there's different buses use that route depending on which route they're on, because a double decker cannot go on both routes due to.
I don't have that level of detail, but we're looking at buses that are within 500 meters of the site with a frequency of more than every 60 minutes. As far as the you were talking about the supermarkets, well, it's actually, so it says nearest grocery shop within 1,000 meters or less. So this is scored as having a supermarket because there's the Co-op, which is a small convenience supermarket.
It's not a supermarket, it's a convenience store. There is a difference on their opening hours, etc. There is a difference.
Okay, but does it sell everyday items that people could get to live their life with?
Depends on what you classify as an everyday item.
Okay. Well, the co-op is counted as a supermarket, and even if it was a corner shop, it would only score very slightly less anyway. So it's not. It wouldn't make it a material difference to how we've scored this site.
Ros.
Okay, we've got 3 more councillors have asked to speak. First, Councillor Westwood.
Who else?
And Councillor Harley and Councillor Bridger.
Councillor Westwood.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, this is one where we've got to screw our courage to the sticking place, isn't it, basically? And what I'm going to suggest is what Richard Kent brought up. The level and complexity of questions that have come out this afternoon means that I, for one, am not happy making a decision this afternoon on this site. I am going to propose that we defer this matter to the next cycle so that we can make sure we get answers to the questions that have been raised, such as to do with the access and to do with the possible, I say possible, alternative sites for this development. So I'm proposing that we defer and that we get answers.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Westwood, do you want to defer just one cycle or as long as it takes?
Just one cycle. Let's get it done quickly, please.
Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Cherry.
Chairman, can I come in here? It's Councillor Harley here, because as Councillor Westwood was actually actually discussing something that I was actually going to speak about. So obviously, I'm quite happy to second that, but with a proviso. If will you allow me to just say that to come in to Councillor Westwood? Would you allow me to do that?
Well, it's already been seconded.
It's related to that, because I wanted to know, really, if we defer it, what advantages is it going to be? Are we going to be going over the same sort of thing that we're going over now? Because we've listened to this for an hour and a half. I quite understand where people are coming from, because we've all got something like it in our wards that we got real issues with. So let's put it this way. It looks as if it's a fairly good package. We're not going to, please everybody, but if we can move on, what are the advantages would be for deferring it, only to come back with the same sort of thing and not really moving forward or doing anything? That's my comment to it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bridger, and we're speaking to deferment now. To the amendment.
I wasn't. Thanks, Chair. No, I wasn't going to speak to that actually. I was just going to make a quick point that I disagree. If we're talking about a shop, but now that needs to be a supermarket and the bus needs to be a double decker, I think, we're on dodgy ground there, and probably nothing would get through this committee. But that's all I wanted to say on that, not to deferment.
Okay.
Chairman, Richard Kent has asked to speak again.
Richard.
Chairman, yes, thank you. I just wanted to come back on what Councillor Westwood said. I think we do have answers to the questions that have been posed. And I think James Wigmore in particular has given a great deal of detail as to the thinking behind the conclusions that have been reached. And the officer recommendation is for approval, and it is a good package, as Councillor Harley has intimated. Alternative sites aren't of relevance, because this is allocated in the local plan. It is an allocated housing site, so that in itself wouldn't be a reason to defer it. The reason I mentioned it was I think it would be unfortunate for the council to refuse its own scheme on its own land in a local plan it's allocated. If there were some very specific things that members wanted to see addressed that would make it acceptable, then that would be a better route to take than refusing the application. But the officer's recommendation is that it does meet the relevant criteria. It is an exemplar scheme. It is driven by our climate emergency, as a number of councillors have said. And I think that's the important point to take away, I think.
Ros.
Councillor Leigh Morgan has asked to speak, Chairman.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you. It's regarding deferment. I just wonder whether deferring this matter for one cycle would give enough time to the proper exploration of an alternative site. And I wonder whether we ought to be amending that proposal so that it entails coming back once we have an alternative site to compare it with.
Chairman, if I could, sorry, just to come back on that, I think that is a bit of a red herring. We do have a planning application on an allocated site in front of us. The question of an alternative, I don't think is before us. We have to deal with this application on this site. If there are alternative sites, then as I said earlier, that is probably something that could be developable. That is probably something to bring forward through the next local plan.
Any more comments on deferment, Ros?
Nothing on deferment. I think the officer Roger Wilmot wants to speak again.
Roger, on deferment.
Okay, Chairman, I wasn't proposing to specifically to speak on to deferment. I was just hoping to clarify a couple of things and just put some of the comments into a slightly wider context. But if you don't wish me to sort of speak on that at the present, then I'm happy to sort of withdraw. But that was my intention, because I think there are some wider perspectives that it's worth remembering actually in conjunction with this site.
Okay. So, Ros, we have no more comments on deferral?
No more comments on deferral, Chairman.
Okay, so we have a proposal for deferment for one cycle. Sue, please conduct the roll call vote.
Thank you, Chairman. So they'll be taking the vote from each councillor in alphabetical order, and for each vote taken, the councillor will be confirming that they've heard the whole of the debate. The proposal is for deferment for one cycle. When I say for, it will be for deferral. Against deferral. Councillor Bird.
Against.
Councillor Bridger.
Against.
Councillor Bryant.
Against.
Councillor Cherry.
For.
Councillor Cole.
Against.
Councillor Crew.
He's gone.
Thank you. Councillor Harley.
Mute.
Councillor Harley.
Yes, sorry. As I seconded it, I better go for.
Thank you. Councillor Hearn.
Against.
Councillor Keating.
For.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
For.
Councillor McQuillan.
Against.
Councillor Payne.
Against.
And Councillor Westwood.
For.
That's 7 against deferral, Chairman.
Okay, that's lost. Roger, you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to place one or two of the sort of comments in context. So if I can just clarify for members in terms of disability standards and access for disabled. I just wanted to make the point that this scheme exceeds the required standard in terms of the number of properties that are policy DM42 and DM43 compliant. So it actually performs well in that respect. I think in terms of the parking spaces that would be associated with those, that's very much a detail that can be worked out at a later point as to precisely which parking spaces are the best ones for those particular units. Just in terms of one or two of the wider points, as I say, in terms of the access, I mean, we have dealt with a number of other similar sort of schemes, as I think James Wigmore has alluded to, and I think one probably relatively recently that comes to mind probably would be the one at William Dorr Close at Banwell, which was taken off the turning head or the end stub end of a residential access road there. I think the other thing that I really wanted to just draw attention to was that there's been, I think, quite a lot of comments about the accessibility of the site. We have to bear in mind that it's not that long ago that Inspector dealt with the Youngwood Lane site for 450 dwellings. Arguably, that's possibly slightly further distant from facilities than this one is, but that obviously was the Inspector saw fit to allow that appeal. But as you'll probably recall from the last committee, I drew attention to a number of fairly substantial improvements to the transport situation around this part of Nailsea that would be funded and effectively therefore within the council's control to deliver. So those include, I think, £650,000 towards bus service improvements, 326,000 I think it was to providing and improving the pedestrian and cycle connections along the bridle path down to Backwell Station, and some fairly significant contributions also to public rights of way and sustainable travel. Putting it further in its context, that there are various other sort of highway improvements that are funded by the Youngwood Lane development as well. And in terms of the application that's in front of you, if I could just sort of refer you to the recommendation and the fact that, again, this one will deliver contributions towards effectively setting up the car club proposal. There would be contributions effectively to create travel plan opportunities, which commonly involve providing subsidisation for things like purchase of cycles, potentially car sharing arrangements, and bus or public transport taster tickets. So there are a variety of mitigatory measures sort of on offer, and again, I think further provision for improvements to rights of way and footpath networks in the area. Those will also provide access to the countryside from this site, and again, the Engine Lane site also was providing financial contributions towards improving access around the surrounding area by doing things like replacing current stiles with more disability-friendly gates and so on. So, as I say, I just wanted to draw attention to those points, which I think it's perhaps hopefully worth bearing in mind in terms of the accessibility of this site.
Thank you. Ros, any more comments?
No further requests to speak from councillors or officers, Chairman.
Okay, in which case, can I invite Councillor Bird to sum up?
I think when it comes down to it, I don't think there is any question against the ethos and the standards trying to be set by this development. The question to me is whether those high standards can be met given its location and its distance from the facilities. And that's the reason I feel that I'll be voting against this. So I'll put the a proposal forward that I said earlier for refusal.
Thank you. So we have a proposal to refuse the application Sue, please.
So, Chairman, just before we do, can we just be clear on what we're saying is the reason for refusal? The words I've got is it's to do with restricted access and lack of parking, contrary to the relevant policies. Is that what we're voting on?
I think Councillor Bird outlined the council policies in particular.
I've said contrary to policy CS11 of the core strategy and DM 24 and 28 of the sites and policies plan, due to the fact of the access being compromised on the safety terms and the traffic problems caused by the lack of parking on the site, simply because of its distance away from the centre and the fact that it won't achieve the high standards that it's trying to set itself because of the distance it's away from the facilities.
Thank you. So, Sue, please conduct the roll call vote.
Thank you, Chairman. So I will now take the vote from each councillor in alphabetical order, and for each vote taken, the councillor will be confirming that they have heard the whole of the debate unless they state otherwise. The proposal is for refusal for the reasons just outlined by Councillor Bird. When I say for, it will be for refusal. Councillor Bird.
For.
Councillor Bridger.
Against refusal.
Councillor Bryant.
Approve.
Can I just clarify that, Councillor Bryant? Do you mean against refusal?
Sorry, no, I'm going for approval.
Yes, sir, Councillor Bryant. The proposal is for refusal.
No, I'm approving the recommendation, the officer's recommendation.
So you're against refusal?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Cherry.
For refusal.
Councillor Cole.
For.
Councillor Crew. I believe he's left the meeting. Councillor Harley.
Yep.
Sorry, Councillor Harley.
You're muted. You're muted.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hearn.
For.
Councillor Keating.
Against.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
For refusal.
Councillor McQuillan.
Against.
Councillor Payne.
Against.
Councillor Westwood.
Against.
Chairman, that's 7 against refusal and 5 for. The motion is lost.
Okay, so we need another proposal from the committee.
Chair, I'll move for approval.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second, Chair.
Any more comments from members? Ross?
Sorry, Chairman. No more comments.
Chairman, if I may, could I just clarify? It's the officer's recommendation as on the update sheet.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Chairman. Councillor Cherry has just asked to speak.
Councillor Cherry.
Sorry, but can we just have clarity about the actual road, which the issues about safety standards, because I am really still concerned about that. I just wanted the officers to go and look at it. That's all. It just seems that they have applied different standards, and if it is a risk in this area. Anyway, look, I still think we should be deferring this, but God, just go ahead. Just do it. I'm positive.
Richard.
Chairman, if I may, it has been looked at and we have talked about it in some length this afternoon, and the highway officer has been on site and has looked at it, and we are satisfied as far as we can be about all the technical highway aspects.
Okay. Councillor Bridger, do you wish to sum up?
Chair, I don't really want to add to my comments earlier. I just want to move for officer recommendation, please.
Okay, so we now have a proposal to approve the application. Sue, please conduct the roll call vote.
Thank you, Chairman. The proposal is for approval. When I say for, it will be for approval. Councillor Bird.
Against.
Councillor Bridger.
For.
Councillor Bryant.
For.
Councillor Cherry.
Abstain.
Councillor Cole.
Against.
Councillor Crew. Believe has left. Councillor Harley.
For.
Councillor Hearn.
Against.
Councillor Keating.
For.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Against.
Councillor McQuillan.
For.
Councillor Payne.
For.
Councillor Westwood.
For.
Chairman, that's carried. It's 7 for approval and 4 were against.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7, application 20/P/2020/FUL, Rickford Chapel, Barrington. Jessica.
Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, first, this is Councillor Bryant. I wish to declare a pecuniary interest and I shall leave the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Pecuniary interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will recall, this application is for the change of use of the former Masonic Hall to office, research and development use. The application was deferred at the January committee for the applicant to consider providing 4 parking spaces within other land owned by the applicant. First, we'll run through the slides to remind members of the proposal. The first slide shows the application site, which is in red. This is around the building itself. All other land owned by the applicant is outlined in blue. Next slide, please. This slide shows the existing ground floor and mezzanine floor arrangement of the hall. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed plans for the ground floor and mezzanine floor. These plans are the indicative layout of what the office could potentially look like. Next slide, please. This slide shows the application site on the right-hand side, as well as the A368 and the junction of the lane on the A368 going down towards Rickford. Next slide, please. This is the same junction. This is the A368 with a junction going into Rickford. The gated access on the side is the only access to the application site at present. Next slide, please. This is the same junction looking the other way, so the A368 leading up towards Blagden with the junction coming back. The application site is to the left beyond the red trees. Next slide, please. This is just an aerial photograph of the application site marked as Rickford Chapel towards the bottom right. The A368 is visible as well as the access lane going towards Rickford, and at the top we can see the pub, the Plume and Feathers and some of the residential dwellings within the Rickford area. So following further discussion with the applicant, it's been found that the Highways Authority have assessed the application and found that the change of use would have a shortfall of 4 parking spaces, which would be a betterment on the current shortfall in parking spaces for the current use of the site. The proposal is seeking a commercial use for the Grade 2 listed building in order to provide funding to repair and maintain this building. The provision of 4 parking spaces, including a new access, a hard standing and security fencing, has been estimated by the applicant to cost between £12,000 and £14,000 in addition to the current fee of this project. There is also concern that creating a hard standing with associated fencing in an open area would encroach into the area of outstanding natural beauty, causing a visual harm to the area of outstanding natural beauty. And it's for those reasons that the applicant has decided not to provide any additional parking spaces within this application, as this would result in the project becoming unviable and would potentially cause harm to the area of outstanding natural beauty.
Thank you. Councillor Keaton.
Thank you, Chair. As you'll recall, we moved to defer this application at the last meeting in order to provide the applicants a chance to consider opportunities to provide parking, because I think there was a general view amongst members that we were keen to find an alternative use for this important building that creates a great deal of character for Rickford, but there were concerns around safety of not providing proper parking facilities. At this point, I'm quite disappointed that no move towards a compromise solution has been made by the applicant to provide proper parking facilities for commercial use. I would worry somewhat that the arguments around the site that have been proposed for parking are a little bit disingenuous, as the applicant has put forward that site for housing as part of the call for sites process. So I wonder if that argument stands up. So we find ourselves in a bit of a tricky situation. At this point, I'm minded to propose refusal of the application, given the significant impact that not providing parking for an office facility would have. But I'm open to hearing suggestions from colleagues and officers about how we can move forwards and find a positive way forwards, maybe perhaps through proposing conditions to restrict the number of people that they could be using the office at any one time. So at this point, I would propose that we refuse the application, but interested to hear the debate going forward.
So is there a seconder?
Yes, I'm happy to second that proposal. Yes.
Okay.
Chairman, Councillor Harley has asked to speak.
Councillor Harley.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, in a way, obviously, because I represent a rural area and know this area very well, I have great sympathy, I really do. But I think we're in a very difficult position here. I think that, you know, it's been used in the past and there have been more cars there. It's been corrected that the Masonic usage was every month. And I do agree with the comments that we've received, that, you know, we're dealing with this application on its own, not about the impact in the village, because that's always been there. You know, it comes and goes. My heart actually rules my head. In a way, what I want to see, and we do know that Sir David Wills owns a lot of property there, and he's obviously been approached and feels that it's not necessary, irrespective of that reason or not. But my heart tells me we, in a way, cannot move this any further, because it's vitally important that that landmark is absolutely retained. And I think at the end of the day, the sort of people that will be using it will be a very small unit, probably some sort of computerized thing. But I do sympathise with the ward councillor, but I feel that, quite frankly, it's obviously not going to be moved by the applicant, and I don't see there's any way forward that the officers probably can recommend anything. So I really cannot support that.
Thank you. Ross.
Chairman, Councillor Bridger has asked to speak, and then Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Councillor Bridger.
Thank you very much, Chair. I agree very much with Councillor Harley's point there. I seem to recall from the last meeting that the officers made a point that actually this application, in a funny kind of way, it ties it down to a lower parking requirement in planning terms, this application, because of its past use. So I think on the basis of that and the point that Councillor Harley just made about the overriding necessity really to keep that landmark maintained, I will probably go for officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you. This is a beautiful building, as we've just seen in one of the photographs. Grade 2 listed building, but it's been unused for 3.5 years. And it's not good for the structures. So I support the plans for its proposed new use. But there's only parking for one vehicle, or maybe up to 4 rather, whilst there'll be desk spaces, as we've just seen, for 6 and possibly 7 people. And there's also the full-time caretaker to cater for. So it can be safely assumed that they will all possibly travel by car to work. And the alternative of not being able to park on site is that they're going to be parked on the road. And surely it's a comparatively narrow road, and I don't think that we would want to see parking along that area for something up to 5.5 days every week. Now, previously, it was used just once a month for Masonic meetings, but that is vastly different for the probability of 5.5 days parking. I'm persuaded by the objection of the Burrington Parish Council, which identifies an area with potential for such a number of cars to be parked, but it's included in a larger site, which is subject to another application by the same applicant for housing development. It seems that he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. There's a problem here. Parking on the road or nearby private land going from once a month by the Masons to no vehicles parked along this site for the last 3.5 years, and on again now to the prospect of 6 or 7 vehicles visiting it for at least 6 days a week. The applicant is clutching at straws if he believes that parking cars will have an adverse impact on the AONB. It's not as if the former chapel is on a prominent height, of course. There are other buildings nearby. So I think that at the present time, if the parking issue cannot be addressed, and that's down to the applicant, then I wouldn't be able to support it.
Thank you.
Richard Kent has asked to speak, Chairman.
Richard.
Chairman, thank you. It's only just to come back on Councillor Keating's query about conditions. I think, subject to anything that Jessica wants to add, we have looked at that, and I think we are concerned that it wouldn't meet the necessary tests of enforceability and meeting a planning purpose to try and limit somehow the number of people that could be in the building. All conditions have to be enforceable and they have to be reasonable, and if we try to limit the number of people within a building at any one time, I think that would be a problem in terms of meeting the requirements. One thing we do have to bear in mind, as has been mentioned, is what the previous use was in planning terms, and whilst it was a fairly low intensity use, it could be used for another form of public hall for the local community, which could be more active and could have more people more frequently. And I think that's the point, as Councillor Bridger made clear. It is a listed building at the end of the day, and we do have a duty to try and find alternative uses or try and support alternative uses to keep the listed building going. So I think through Jessica, we have explored with the applicant whether there have been any options to provide parking, and that's been looked at. So I think that is the predicament we're now in.
Ros, any more members wishing to speak?
Yes, Councillor Westwood has asked to speak, Chairman.
Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Chair. Well, there's a certain continuity between items this afternoon, in that the applicant appears to be pointing towards a new way of doing business, where if you have a workspace, you do not assume that everybody will turn up there in a car. Some people will get there on their bike. Some people will possibly walk there, even if it is a distance. Like I said, I think this is very interesting. I think the applicant makes a good point.
Thank you. Ros.
No further requests to speak, Chairman.
Jessica, any closing comments?
All I would say is on the comment of the number of desk spaces in the office, that is an indicative plan only about a potential arrangement within the office. As Richard has said, any condition on limiting the number of people in the office would have to meet the 6 tests, which we have explored, and we have found that that's likely to fail on 2 of the relevant tests being reasonable and unenforceable. So that's all I would say.
Thank you. Councillor Keating, do you wish to sum up?
Thanks. I'll do so briefly, because I think we're all reaching the limits of our endurance after something of a marathon session today. I continue to hold that I think the lack of provision of parking is dangerous for the community and creates a real risk for locals. Whilst it may be the case that people will continue to or increase their active travel, at the moment there is very limited safe walking or cycling routes to Rickford from Blagdon or other settlements. So whilst in future our active travel strategy may solve that problem, at the moment I think most journeys will be by car. I recognise that all councillors are keen to find a solution to save this building, as am I. But I think at the moment, given the safety issues around parking, I'm not able to support and will thus propose to reject.
Thank you. So we have a proposal to refuse the application. Sue, please conduct the roll call vote.
Thank you, Chairman. I will now take the vote from each councillor in alphabetical order, and for each vote taken, the councillor will be confirming that they have heard the whole of the debate. The proposal is for refusal as set out for the reasons suggested by Councillor Keating. When I say for, it will be for refusal. Councillor Bird.
I think he may have left the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Bridger.
Against.
Councillor Bryant has left the meeting. Councillor Cherry.
Against.
Councillor Cole.
Against.
Councillor Crewe has left the meeting. Councillor Harley.
Muted.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Councillor Hearn.
Against.
Councillor Keating.
For.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
For.
Councillor McQuillan, I think I saw a message he'd left the meeting.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
For.
Councillor Westwood.
Against.
The motion was lost, Chairman. That's 4 against the proposal.
Thank you. So from the chair now, I will move officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder?
I will second it, Chairman.
Thank you. Any more debate? Ros?
No more requests to speak, Chairman.
Jessica, any more comments?
No, none from me. Thank you, Chairman.
None from me. So we have a proposal to approve the report. Sue, please conduct the roll call vote.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Bird, we believe, is left.
That's right, Sue, yeah.
Sorry, I ought to say the proposal is, I know you're listening, but the proposal is for approval as per officer's recommendation. When I say for, it will be for approval. Councillor Bird is left. Councillor Bridger.
For.
Councillor Bryant. He's left. I'll just wait for that phone to go. Councillor Cherry.
For.
Councillor Cole.
For.
Councillor Crew is left. Councillor Harley. For. Councillor Hearn.
For.
Councillor Keating.
Abstain.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Abstain.
Councillor McQuillan. Is left.
He's left.
Councillor Payne.
Abstain.
And Councillor Westwood.
For.
That's carried, Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 8, Q3 performance. Richard.
Chairman, you've got a full report, and given the length of the meeting, I don't intend to spend any time on it, but I'll happily answer any questions you've got. The only thing I'd like to just flag up that is the teams are all extremely busy, very stretched. Caseloads are high, but the staff are responding as best they can, all working from home under the current lockdown arrangements.
Thank you. Ros, any comments?
Yes, Councillor Bridger has asked to speak.
Councillor Bridger.
Thank you, Chair. Ever so quickly, Richard, we had, I don't mind saying this in public, we had a planning peer review process, obviously, and as this committee met with the officers from, whoever it was, on the 17th of January, it'd be good to see what happened to that. But I just wanted to say one thing. I think this meeting has been a really good advertisement for why we need to expand this committee to about 18 members as quickly as possible. We're down to single figures by the end of this meeting, and I just don't think that's right. Particularly for really applications that were really quite contentious, and for respect to communities and ward members, I really do think we need to sort of do something about that quite quickly.
Yeah,
thank you, Chair.
Chairman, can I just come in and second Councillor Bridger on that, because it looked at this moment in time that, there wasn't going to be enough to take a vote on this one, and it's very contentious, and we've got 7-4, 3 abstentions, and people voted before as against, and now have gone into abstention, so we're getting very conflicting views, really.
Ros.
Councillor Cherry has asked to speak, Chairman.
Councillor Cherry.
I support Steve Bridger on this because it's Councillor Bridger, because it's absolutely vital when we have situations like this. We do need to explore issues, and it does look less like we're less accountable if we don't have as many members. I don't believe in 30 or the higher numbers, but we should be at least 18.
Well, we've never had 30.
Yeah, no. But you know what I mean?
27.
Yes, 27.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chair,
I do think we should
Chair, can I just add my support for what everybody else has said, so that possibly all of the remaining committee can speak? There you go.
Ross.
Richard Kent has asked to speak, Chairman.
Richard Kent.
Yeah, thank you. We have had some initial feedback from the peer review team, but we're expecting their reports imminently, and we'll obviously feedback on that. And committee process and committee size was something that they did talk about. Our committee of 27 is abnormally large. I think the question of how big it should be is obviously something that we can work through with members. But I think in the case of this particular meeting, it sort of illustrates the point that actually it doesn't really matter how many people start the meeting. If they've got other commitments that mean they have to leave, then I think that's a slightly different issue. So perhaps it is something about time available and priority and the like. So it sounds like some people did have other meetings which they had to go to, but experience tends to suggest that a planning and regulatory committee will run for at least 2 hours and probably more. And so I think that's something we all need to bear in mind. But I think the Planning Advisory Service will come up with some suggestions and ideas that we can certainly work together on.
Ros?
Perhaps we could start future meetings at 2 o'clock rather than past.
Yeah. Chairman, can I just say one thing? I think Richard's in a very difficult position, because when in the previous administration you only had one party. This time you've got a partnership of 5 different political parties, so they've all got to be represented, haven't they? That's the point. I think that's very difficult to address. But I have to say, I agree. What is important is that everybody, all those councillors, have their major issues in their communities are planning. And I think they could get very isolated if they're not included somehow. I know we sub if it's in our own patch, but it's just a general feeling of it. So whether we encourage them to actually come into the meeting as guests and do it that way, I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's broad support for about 18 members or so. That's my feeling. Anyway,
okay.
Ros.
Councillor Westwood has asked to speak, Chairman.
Councillor Westwood.
Yeah. Thank you. Very quickly, just on the point that Anne just brought up. Although the setup of the committee is supposedly politically balanced, in terms of subbing, that seems to go by the board. I don't think this afternoon's committee, for example, was necessarily politically balanced. That you can sub out of your group. So I think the point you make, Anne, although theoretically a good one, in practicality disappears.
Ros.
No further requests, Chairman.
Okay, that report is for noting. Item 9, planning appeals and the update on the airport. Richard.
So, Chairman, yes, we have got a full list of the appeal decisions received and appeals lodged. And you'll see, as I said at the last meeting, the Bristol Airport appeal has been formally submitted. Statements of case are, which is effectively initial skeleton outline of your full case. Those have to be submitted by Monday next week. As well as ourselves and the airport, there are currently 4 other parties that have been accepted by the Planning Inspectorate to have what's called Rule 6 status. And so that's the Parish Councils Airport Association, an organisation called BANCC, an organiser or an individual that is promoting an alternative car parking option, and also an organisation that represents the airline pilots. So everybody will be putting in their skeleton cases imminently. The public inquiry, as you know, is fixed for the 20th of July. Planning Inspectorate's most recent thinking is that it's more likely to run for 10 to 12 weeks rather than the 4 weeks originally anticipated. So we've been asked to start to think about planning for that and how that might operate. And we've also been asked to consider options for holding it in person at a physical event, lockdown and social distance permitting, but also a virtual event if we have to, but also what they call a blended approach, which would be a mixture of virtual and physical. So that's causing us some scratching of heads, and we're sitting down with Mike Wriggle and other IT colleagues to look at how that might operate and how we could accommodate any or all of those options. Plainly, the prospect of sitting all summer with holidays is also an issue, and that's a matter that will be raised when we have a formal case conference with the Planning Inspectorate at the beginning of March. I think that's pretty much where we are. In other matters, we are active on a number of other appeals, and in particular, we have a batch of enforcement appeals which have landed on us pretty much simultaneously, and that is causing the enforcement team great deal of stress, and we have in fact had a meeting with the planning inspectorate to look at how we can better work together to make sure that enforcement appeals are more spaced out and don't all land on the same people simultaneously, because we've only got so many pairs of hands. That's a reflection of how active the enforcement team are, but when you serve a notice you never to release an appeal, unfortunately they've all come in a rush.
Ros.
Councillor Payne would like to ask a question, Chairman.
Councillor Payne.
Yeah, thank you. Could I ask a question about the appeal against the enforcement notice at 4 Ellenborough Crescent in Weston? I understand that that the appeal was not so much against the principle of the enforcement, but it was in relation to this time frame given to comply. Now, hopefully we'd win the appeal, because the timescale seems to be perfectly reasonable, as it's only taking down a fence. But my question is, in the event that the appeal is upheld, would it be just a question of further time being given to comply, or would it actually prevent the enforcement taking place at all?
So if the enforcement appeal is allowed, that means that the council loses its case and the fence could stay, and it would probably mean that planning permission is granted through the appeal process for it. If the appeal is dismissed, that effectively means the enforcement notice is upheld, and the time for compliance kicks in from when that decision is issued, and the applicant has the period of time on the notice from the date of the appeal decision to comply with the notice. With an enforcement notice, when an appeal is lodged, the notice is effectively suspended until the appeal is decided. So there's a time for compliance in every enforcement notice, but that time for compliance is suspended until the appeal is heard.
Okay, thank you.
Ros.
No further requests, Chairman.
Okay, item 10. There is no urgent business. Declare the meeting closed. Thank you all very much.